So I guess we'll just get going, and whoever comes. Let's open it up with how many of you are developers that have dabbled with biometrics and authentication? How many of you associate biometrics with Face ID? I think it's the same. Right? So we'll talk a lot about that and what the differences and misconceptions are, and what you get and what you don't get, and how to build a fintech offering with strong authentication based on what I'm going to call, for the purposes of today, real biometrics. Not that Face ID is not a real biometric, but you'll understand where I'm going with this as the talk goes along. One of the biggest issues with, I'm going to take this off. One of the biggest issues, one of the biggest questions that come up when we talk about biometrics is, what is the pushback? And what we'll see throughout the discussion is the pushback is not really coming from consumers anymore, because we use our biometrics to unlock our phones, to board the airplane, like millions and millions and millions of transactions every single day. When offered the choice, most consumers will go for biometrics. So where is the pushback? The pushback is generally on the product side, with enterprises, with fintechs, with the developers, because of the complexity, and with compliance and legal departments, because nobody wants to touch it because it's like a hot potato. So today we're going to focus more on the second aspect, the compliance and the regulatory and the and how to build products using biometrics that are privacy by design, that will pass muster with compliance, that will overcome the privacy roadblocks, but we will touch on how to make the implementation smoother and the user experience seamless as we go along. So to open this up, I think I'm supposed to stay within these lines, and I think I just messed something up. Okay. For those who don't know me, I have been in the biometrics and identity space for more than 25 years. I helped grow one of the first facial recognition startups into what is today known as IDEMIA. Most of my work has been actually on the market-facing side, so I feel like a bit of an imposter at this conference where it's all the developers. But I also helped to draft some of the early privacy guidelines around biometric usage. Back when nobody knew what biometrics and facial recognition was, the industry faced a backlash from privacy advocates, and we went on the offense and put together different guidelines for how biometrics should be used safely and securely. And a lot of those guidelines today are coded in law, in GDPR, BIPA, all of that stuff. I started Anonybit a few years ago because I recognized that these privacy concerns were definitely a roadblock in biometric adoption. And that even though biometrics are the real way of associating you with your identity, people won't touch it if they don't feel like, they're not going to be sued or anything like that. So, so Anonybit is a platform. Today, Anonybit is a platform, a privacy-preserving identity platform that handles the entire gamut of the user journey. We ingest biometrics at onboarding, store it, manage it, and then we get invoked for authentication downstream at all different kinds of use cases, whether it's log on, step up, account recovery. There are agentic flows as well, and we'll get into all of that. I'm not going to use this. So I think a lot of what we're seeing here at the conference are the possibilities with fintech. That's why we're all here. That's why we love it. Consumer empowerment, consumer choice. I was talking to somebody earlier today about about the impact of open banking and all of the different possibilities that, that creates. And Karen and I were talking about crypto and cross-border and all of that. So, this is all like really super, super exciting. But in these same exact conversations, with the excitement comes a lot of the concerns with how to deal with fraudsters and deepfakes and account takeover fraud that is coming from all different directions. And we don't need to look very far to know that we're in a crisis, right? We're all feeling this crisis because we're living it as consumers. We're living it as children, siblings, parents. We're like, this is us, not as developers, not as founders and things. This is us as people and the everyday life that we're living. The reason that this happens, and I often say, like, authentication is broken because the way we do, I was talking to somebody before, not in the room, so I'm not embarrassing anyone, and I asked them, how do they manage identity? And they said, well, like, what do they do? They said, well, we verify that the email is valid and we verify that the phone number has been around, and then we enroll them, and then they log into their bank account and then link their bank account through open banking to our platform. And I said, well, with all due respect, like, that the email address is not the person, right? Like, these are like all indicators of who we are. And they were like, thought I was being critical. I said, I'm not being critical. This is fundamentally the problem. Is that we are using substitutes for identity because we don't know how to manage the biometric. And we don't know how to manage the biometric because of the third point here, data breaches are everywhere. I don't need to tell you this, right? A lot of the regulations, I find the regulations really, really confusing. And over the weekend, or last Friday, there was an update to the NIST digital identity guidelines. So all these things are changing all the time. And the possibilities around AI are making this whole thing even worse. And to demonstrate this, if you've seen this before, don't play the game. But one of these pictures are real, and 5 of them are deep fakes. So we're gonna play a little game, and we'll see how many of you get the answer correct. So, how many think number 1 is the real one? How many think number 2 is the real one? What about number 3? What about number 4? Not everybody voted yet. What about number 5? What about number 6? We're going to put you on the spot.
Oh, boy.
5 of these are deep fakes and 1 of them is real. Which one do you think is the real one?
Oh gosh, that's really hard to tell. I would say 1 or 2. I think 1.
Okay, so first of all, if this was math class, we would see like the distribution all across the board, which just shows that like we can't tell. Like nobody really knows the answer. The answer is number 4. It doesn't matter because like it's like everybody here, we're all smart people. Like we all chose something else. So it just shows that this problem is difficult. And then if you read the NIST guidelines and all that, like people are saying don't use voice anymore because you can't tell the difference between a deepfake voice and a real voice. And I have my own opinions on all that, but clearly what this is telling you is that we can't do this by ourselves anymore. And it's just getting very, very hard. As a side note, the real way to solve this problem, there are 2. One is to use technologies, which we'll talk about, liveness and deepfake detection technologies, and at the same time to layer them with other signals together. That's really the answer for how you combat it. The answer is not throw out the baby with the bathwater. The answer is understand where the risk is and employ the right technologies in order to maintain it. So the reason this all happens, and 2 years ago I wrote a forward-thinking blog on like, okay, in an age of Gen AI, the dark side of Gen AI. And I was trying to say, like, there are 5 things that need to be done in order to deal with this problem. And I linked the problem to two core issues. Number one, personal data stored inside centralized honeypots that are impossible to protect. And then we allow the use of that data to authenticate. And now you add a deepfake on top of it. The deepfake has access to all of that stolen data, and that's what really compounds the problem. Everyone, there's no one in this room, outside of this room, that is not affected by this. And from a fintech perspective, if you're trying to generate consumer empowerment and you're trying to generate consumer trust, losing $51 million a year is not the way to do that. So how do we get past this? What are we doing wrong? So I mentioned that this person said, oh yeah, like we use email, like to do, like this was an onboarding. This wasn't even authentication. This was like to open the account. But when it comes past the account, when it comes to authentication, most of what we're doing today is relating to what you know, which is all this data that is stolen and used against us from the dark web, and what you have, which could be your phone, which could be your laptop, which could be a token. And these things are, quite frankly, compromisable, if that's a word. And they're compromisable in ways that we don't really think about. So malware is like the obvious one. I get somebody to put a malware on my phone, and then the malware runs its own script, even though it's my device. By the way, I had a friend who, this happened to him. He had an update through his work on the VPN, and somehow there was a malware on it, and the malware stole the credentials to his online banking, sent out $5,800 via Zelle, and then he had to go and fight the bank that it wasn't him, and the bank said, well, it was you, it was your computer, it was your IP address, and he literally had to like furnish information that showed that he was elsewhere. Took them to small claims court because they wouldn't accept what he put forward. And then at the end ended up settling for $400 less than what they stole from him because I told him keep on fighting, and then eventually he's like, this isn't worth my time anymore. But this is the problem, and if you're a fintech and then you hold the liability for that, how much can you take? So that's one not obvious way. And then the second one is the last point on here, an injection attack. So if you come from the world of fraud, you know that injection attack is compromising the transmission. So I used to be with BioCatch, and we used to so if you're familiar with the fraud, those fraud type of solutions with detecting man in the middle and all of that kind of stuff, this is what we're talking about. But in the world of identity now, there's an injection where I can take your biometric image or your template and then put it in after that front end user interface, bypassing all of the controls that you think that are there, and then enabling the authentication. So it's important to understand how these things are compromised, because if you understand how these things are compromised, then it's easier to actually build a solution to combat them. The difference between the something you have, which is your phone, and the something you know, which could be like, what your dog ate for breakfast, and the biometric is that the biometric is you. So there is a concept, there's an industry analyst, she puts out a report on the digital identity space, and she talks about an identity hierarchy. In the middle is the human, and everything that you do away from the human becomes more and more risky or representative of the human. So the goal is to get as close to the human as possible, and the only way to do that is with biometrics. So the reason I asked the question at the beginning of how many people associate a biometric with a Face ID and think that's really what a biometric is that I think it's important to understand how biometrics actually work. And this is a very, very, very basic, but it will play into some of the privacy aspects and things of what I'm talking about. So when it comes to biometrics, we are not actually comparing picture against picture or fingerprint image against fingerprint image. That's not really the way it works, or voice recording against voice recording. any biometric, whether it's face, finger, iris, voice, or palm, what it's doing is it's taking the representative sample and converting it into a vector. And the vector is generated with an algorithm that's generally proprietary to a particular vendor. And how the vector gets created will impact the performance or the matching capability of that algorithm. And they all work the same. Here I'm showing selfie, but it's not. It doesn't matter if it's whatever the modality is. So when we're talking about biometrics, there's like three things to consider. One is the capture element, like garbage in, garbage out. If you don't capture a good sample, you will never have a good match. The process of capturing also involves what I talked about before, the liveness detection, the deep fake detection, the ability to tell whether it's a deep fake or not, and also the ability to tell whether there's an injection, like did I try to bypass that front end capture process? So that's number one. Number two is the matching or the template creation, how accurate that is going to be. In the world of face recognition in particular, the things to look at are how well an algorithm performs under different conditions, different lighting conditions, different angles, different backgrounds. How well does an algorithm perform over time? Aging. How well does an algorithm perform with different demographics? Bias, gender, all these kinds of things play into how well a biometric will match. And now for the theme of the talk around privacy is, where is that stuff stored? So the reason I asked about the Face ID is because when you do Face ID, it's doing a matching, but that matching is happening on the phone. This template is in the secure enclave on the phone and it never leaves the phone. So if I am able to associate your account and somehow link it on my phone and use my Face ID, then I will get in. And the example that I give for people that are not fully up to speed on this, and I'm happy to do this experiment with anybody here right now, is take your credit card. If you would like to be the guinea pig, I'm happy to take your credit card. And I can take your credit card and I can put it in my Apple Wallet. And I can use my Face ID. I can use my passkey. Who's familiar with passkeys? Okay. So I can use my passkey to unlock my wallet and make a payment, and nobody will ever know that it's not my credit card, because the matching of the biometric is happening on the phone, and the biometric is not associated with the credit card at the bank or with the merchant. So this is just a very lay example of how fraud really happens. Now take that and put it to your bank account, put it to your crypto wallet, put it to any example that you want, whether it's financial or not. So as long as the biometric is tied to the phone, and as long as the phone is the one that's sending the message, you will never know who's actually behind the phone. And in fact, if I'm an attacker, I don't really need your phone, because what happens a couple of times, if the Face ID doesn't work, it defaults to your PIN. And if I get a new phone, I just call the help desk or the bank or whatever, and I just tell them, listen, I have a new phone, I need new credentials to the app. And they ask me okay, what did your mother have for breakfast? What is your favorite color? What street you grew up on? Again, all the things that are available for sale on the dark web. So where and how we store the biometrics becomes really important, because if I'm storing the biometrics on the phone, I may have privacy, right? The template is on the phone, nobody can steal the template, but it's not really security, systemic security. So if you want to have systemic security, then your option is take those templates and put them in some kind of a centralized repository somewhere, on some server somewhere. And then your job is to make sure that those templates don't get stolen, because you don't want to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal saying that you just exposed X million of biometric templates on behalf of people. For a lot of reasons, you don't want that kind of exposure, right? Legal, financial, and also trust. The whole point of fintech is empowerment and trust. So And biometrics are the most sensitive data, so that's like the worst kind of data breach you can have. So where these templates are stored are important from a regulatory standpoint, and it's also important from a security standpoint back to the injection attacks, because if those templates are not protected and somebody has access to it, they can associate the template with some other information and then do an injection attack, and that's very, very difficult to catch. So securing those templates is very, very important. So before we move on, I just want to take a little pause and just say, like, where are we in terms of fintech adoption of biometrics? And I did a little survey, I did some market research, and I was actually intrigued by this statistic that 60% of fintechs are evaluating biometrics or thinking about biometrics or using passkeys, but at scale, they fail. And a lot of the conversations that I've had here are, why are they like, where is the failure actually happening? And the failure that is happening is in these use cases where the standard passkey or device biometric doesn't apply. Step-up authenticate, namely, step-up authentication, account recovery, and what we call risky activity. Like, I'm adding a new payee, I'm adding a new account holder, and things like that. These are called risky activities. And those risky activities, by the way, cannot be caught by your traditional transaction risk monitoring, because it's not an actual transaction. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And when you overlay that with what's happening with the regulations, what I'm finding is that there's a little bit of inertia, because people are not really sure what to do. They see this like huge problem, but they're not really sure exactly what to do. But the name of the game is, whatever you're gonna do, it has to be frictionless, because nobody wants friction. What friction means is a whole other question. But this makes, from a development standpoint, a question. So what do you do? What are your options? So option number one is passkey. Does everybody know how passkeys work? If you don't know, I'm happy to explain. If you don't know what it is, all right. So very, very high level. It's a cryptographic method. There's a private key, there's a key on a device and a key on a server, and you need to somehow unlock the key either with a biometric or a PIN, unlock the key, and that makes the access work. So it's like a passwordless mechanism at a very, very high level. But to unlock that passkey on the device, again, it doesn't require a biometric, but if it requires a biometric, it's a local biometric. And so anybody who can generate that passkey from a device to associate with that account is able to get in, because you don't know who's behind the device. On the one hand, it's very easy though. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. Setting it up is not really difficult. So this is usually like step one for people when we talk about authentication. Something that is gonna come up later, and just bear in mind, is that when you're doing onboarding and you're doing KYC, that process is generally completely separate from the process of establishing a passkey. Remember that, bookmark that thought, I'm gonna come back to it. But in general, passkeys are available, they're everywhere now. Google, Microsoft, everybody's like enabling passkeys, so you see that everywhere. In certain populations, though, it's not exactly all of a sudden like, I'm trying to sign something online, and like I'm signing it, and then it's like, do you want to establish a passkey? And it's like, no, I want to sign the document. I don't want to sign it. I don't want to establish a passkey right now. So there's a lot of things around getting people to use passkeys that are not necessarily as intuitive, but a lot of it has to do with when you actually set it up. The big problem is, again, the fallback to the PIN, and that if you have a new device, you basically have to start all over, and then you're dealing with all of the vulnerabilities, and that's where the attackers go. The attackers don't need your phone. They're not compromising the passkey. They have many other easy and scalable ways to solve their problem. They don't need that. They don't need to do this. The second aspect, choice, what I was saying before, is storing those templates on a centralized repository. So if you do that, and we talked about the protection, how you need to protect it. We could talk about, the standard way is with regular encryption and whatnot. And we know that this is a problem coming with quantum. But it's really important to understand the benefit that you get with a central system, because now you have a system of record. So you have a system of record, back to my example with the credit card, you have a system of record, a biometric, that could actually be associated with the credit card. So when I do want to add your credit card to my wallet, the bank or the issuer can call that centralized server and say, does this belong? And if I get a new phone or I get a new device, I have like a built-in account recovery, I'm able to call that back. And I'm able to associate that with the original KYC or onboarding, right? Because it's like one big system of record. Think about like a driver's license or a passport, all these things are linked, the processes are linked. So there's a huge benefit to this, except we're back to privacy. So doing it the right way, the dream is, how do I take the benefit of the server side and how do I take the benefit of the FIDO side or the passkey side, and how do I eliminate the trade-off and get the best of both worlds? And that's privacy-preserving biometrics. And if you can do it right, then you get the security benefits, you get the privacy benefits, you get the compliance benefit, and you even get the consumer experience benefit, because it's a consistent experience across the board. I don't need to do KYC in one way and then establish a passkey another way and then do account recovery yet a third way. And there are different technologies that are now available, and new approaches and things that have come out. And what you'll notice, since everybody can read, is none of these approaches involve the blockchain, because you cannot put biometrics on the blockchain, because if you do that, then you're back to privacy issues. And if you take biometrics and you split them up, which is what I'm about to get to, and you split it up on the blockchain, then you need to take it off chain in order to do an authentication, and that defeats the purpose, because now you have a single point where an attacker can go to. So I don't really have time to get into every single method. I'm just going to highlight the method that Anonybit uses, because that's the one I'm most familiar with, and the one that I believe solves a lot of the use case considerations that are on the right side. But if we had more time, I would certainly get into all the other methods. And homomorphic encryption is a popular one as well, but it has a lot of issues with scale. So I'm just going to focus on the way we do it, and happy to talk offline on the other methods and go do the pros and cons. So what we do is take biometrics and we apply it to what's called multi-party computation and zero knowledge proofs. So everybody familiar with MPCs? Yeah. No. Yes? I'm seeing a lot of, okay. So we take the biometrics and we split them up, and we shard them, and we encrypt the shards and we anonymize them. And we distribute the shards across a multi-party network. That's the top row that's represented. And so let's just say we split it up into 10 pieces, each that vector, that original vector. So now that vector is scrambled and encrypted and split up over 10 environments that are completely independent. And then when we want to do an authentication, we take the vector again and we split it up, and then we compare the new piece against its stored counterpart. We do the computations in parallel, and it's only the computations that come back. We do not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. There is no way to reassemble the template once it is sharded. This is the privacy by design element, and this is what prevents any single point that an attacker can exploit. The matching for this, by the way, happens in 200 milliseconds, which is very well within the range of authentication requirements. The patent that we have on this also supports what we call one-to-many matching, which is, have I seen you in a gallery before? So you can use that for deduplication, block listing, velocity checks, and whatnot. And we support any biometric modality with this technique. So you can use this technique with face, voice, iris, fingerprint, or palm. And everything that I'm talking about is proven. So when we talk about the pros and cons of some of the other techniques, you find that there are limitations against the kind of things that we're talking about from a flexibility in user experiences. Specifically with payments, if you think about like where biometric payments are going, you see them definitely in the digital channel, but we also see them increasingly in the physical world, like Amazon with the Palm and Whole Foods and whatnot. So I'm going to run through the regulatory landscape quickly, and then I want to show some workflow examples, how you actually put this into a product. So from a regulatory standpoint, we have three things to consider. One is the biometric privacy laws, and there are many, many, many of them today, but for the most part, I need to make sure that I'm in the lines. For the most part, they all have these in common. There are definitely nuances, but I would say it's consent. Whether you do biometrics in a centralized way or in a privacy-preserving way, capturing biometrics still requires consumer consent. There's no way to get around it. And I recommend very highly, I'm not a lawyer, but I would recommend very highly not to try to get around it, because you just end up in trouble, and everybody who's tried and like said, I don't need to, it's just a picture, all that, ends up getting in trouble. So explicit consent for capturing and processing biometrics, privacy by design and data minimization. So only store what you need, because we're sharding it and it's anonymized, and it's not really, a lot of people say the way we've done it is not even considered a biometric anymore, but that makes that data minimization easy to answer. Data residency, a lot of countries, a lot of jurisdictions say, even if you have it privacy by design, that biometric data cannot leave the borders of that country. And very, very important is the right to delete, the right to take out. That's why you can't do biometrics on the blockchain, because you would never be able to comply with this. The second regulation that I think is interesting for this group is the open banking. And how do we protect user data from being accessed fraudulently? Where is the liability between the fintech and the bank? Who owns the actual data? How to protect the data that you actually keep? And how do you ensure that whatever data sharing you're using has the right approvals, authorizations between the people? So these are also use cases where you see biometrics. And finally, this is hot off the press, the new NIST digital identity guidelines, which have been years in the making. Even though most fintechs don't follow the NIST guidelines, I think that there's something here for all of us to understand and learn from, which is, don't do face without liveness. Ensure that you do biometrics with a possession factor. No more email for MFA, no more push notifications for step-ups. And then over and over and over and over again throughout this, I think, 100-page document was privacy. I think there were 74 mentions of privacy in this document, which just goes to show now we cannot separate the issue of privacy from security. So complying is, as I mentioned, capturing consent, the privacy by design. Think about what information you actually need. Don't just capture stuff for the sake of capturing it or storing it just for the sake of storing it. And the two most important things, if nothing else for today, is do not compromise on how you do if you're using selfie, do not compromise on the liveness and the deepfake detection. I will give a shout out to Becky in the audience. She has, her company has a capability that is, I think, bar none. They do this passively, so you don't have to turn your head or blink or do anything like that. In a single frame, you're able to detect whether it's a deep fake or not. And algorithmic performance also. The algorithms are not created equal and the liveness are not created equal. And if you compromise on this, then you compromise on the security of the system. And the second thing, if nothing else from today, is do not think that if you just secure the password, the login, that the system is secure. The fraudsters go to the path of least resistance. They're like water. So if you like, okay, I'm going to use passkeys or something for the login, and then you leave your help desk or account recovery process to a PIN or a password or some kind of a question, that's where the fraudsters are going to go. And the organization that lock this up into what I call circle of identity are going to be protected against fraudsters that will have to go elsewhere, because fraudsters don't really like to work very hard. They like to work at scale, and it's very, 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 very easy for them right now. So I promised a couple of examples, and then I think I'll try to leave a couple of minutes for questions. I mentioned this in the beginning. If you actually give the choice, then customers will go for biometrics. A lot of people question this, but study after study after study shows this. And I know that like when Delta Airlines launched their launch with the board with your face, they had 95% acceptance. Like when offered the choice, that's where people go. So it's up to us to offer the choice. And I can tell you the technologies are available, the solutions are available, the APIs are available. Maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, this stuff wasn't in place, but today it's really easy to do this in a compliant way. So I just want to run through a couple of workflows just to show how all of this stuff works together. The first one is, how do I biometrically sign a transaction to prevent first-party fraud and third-party fraud? Remember, I'm not talking about KYC and onboarding. I'm talking about using biometrics for authentication later. There are very, very good KYC solutions, and there are plenty of examples in economies where there's national ID programs where you hook into the government in order to make sure that a person is who they claim to be when they open an account, and then the fraud is rampant later. So my attention is really later, but obviously the account creation is important. So the idea is you create the account, however you capture the selfie, you bind the selfie to the actual account, like the credit card I was saying. There are ways to create dynamic biometric keys or tokens that you can then use later in the actual payment, and that becomes a signature. So this would be the onboarding. The most important thing is the binding. And for people that are familiar with what's happening with verifiable credentials and mobile driver's licenses and stuff like that, this is where ultimately the failure is going to happen, because everybody is trusting. They're going to trust now the digital credential, which is going to be valid. But then if that credential and that biometric doesn't get bound to the account, it's all downhill from there. So after all of this is actually set up, then when it comes time to actually make a payment, instead of asking for a passkey, and this could be rule-based, so it could be if the payment is under $100, like you don't care, or just use a local passkey, but if it's over a certain amount, you will invoke, again, what I call the real biometrics, and then in addition to just getting like a yes/no response, you actually can get a biometric signature that gets associated with the account. Agents, this is the other one I want to talk about, and then I'll stop. Agents, so how do you manage fraud and identity in a world where the machine is acting autonomously or on your behalf? In my opinion, I feel like the agentic stuff actually breaks a lot of the identity and authentication promises that we all know, because you don't have a human actively all the time. So the same idea as the payment. Right? A human can authorize an agent in the beginning. You have the authentication that is saying that it's really me and I allow this agent to do whatever, and then generate a token and have that token be associated with the agent through the life of the agent's workflow, whatever it is. So later on, 5 steps later, you can see if that agent has been tampered with. Because that's really, really important. When you're dealing with agentic commerce, you have the human identity, and then you have the machine-to-machine element, and putting that together is really, really key. So, so I'm going to stop there to allow some time for questions. There's a lot of examples on APIs and things. I'm happy to share these slides with anybody who wants. But I think for me, I've been doing this for a really, really long time. I feel like it's really exciting now because, like I said, we have the wherewithal to actually make this happen easily, and it doesn't require massive, massive development teams or product teams. It's like with simple APIs, you can actually build these flows, and you can focus on your products and focus on the consumer and the empowerment that you really want. So I will end with this. My contact is here, and I will open it up. I think we have like just 2 minutes, so maybe, I don't know if anybody has any questions. Yes. Oh wait, you wanted to, they're recording this, so they need to give you the.
Thank you. I missed the beginning of the talk, so if I missed this, apologies. What's the relationship that you have with other like participants who are they need you to have certain requirements, like for purposes of storing the data, and how's it been with developing relationships with other like kind of like people in the ecosystem? And the second is, are you seeing like issues with rise of synthetic identity fraud, like Gen AI to bypass biometrics?
Yes, I'll answer the second question first. So yes, there are attempts every single day to bypass biometrics with Gen AI. It happens in two ways. One with what we call presentation, deepfake. So I take, like, I'm a public speaker, right? You can take my video and you can like replay it. You can take a sample, combine it with stolen information about me, and then like, you know, have an impersonation. So that's like on the very, very front end. And then the other challenge is, how do I bypass that whole, if I have a technology called liveness detection that can detect that, what happens if I bypass, if I'm able to do an injection and bypass that very first check? So that's where it's going. To be perfectly blunt, I'm more worried about the injection than I am about the presentation and the deepfake, because I'm gonna borrow from the CTO of my tech right now. If a computer generated an image, a computer can recognize that it was a computer generated image. So I'm actually less worried about that. I think the injection detection is much more scary, and I think people don't really understand that that's the danger attack vector. And so they don't necessarily know to ask the question, to look for the technologies that can check for that. You know, being in the space, like I know, so I'm like very focused on it, but I think that's where like there's a blind spot there. But there are, in the fraud detection space, this is a standard thing, like all the man on the middle, all the injection, it's a standard thing. We just need to bring it into the world of biometrics, and there are capabilities that do that today. So that's the second question. The first question was about sharing the data. Was it? So there's two aspects of data sharing. One is, can you create like a giant repository, like almost like a consortium? That's one model of data sharing, and the other is more like related to open banking. So in terms of like a consortium aspect, there is no technological barrier to doing this. It's really just people that are, or an entity that is saying, okay, we're gonna do this. And one of the very interesting things now with these privacy enhancing technologies is that you can create a consortium without actually sharing PII. So, you know, there are many, many more possibilities today that didn't exist before. But these are policy level issues. These are not technology level issues. Anything else? You have a question? I think they're kicking us out of here.
I do have a question. It's with everything that's going on, it seems that liveness is probably one of the best indicators proof of an individual, but what do you compare that to?
So liveness is not a comparison tool. Liveness is only telling you that a person, that the
Right.
presenter is
The
alive.
picture is me, so what do you compare?
Right, that's why I said, like, you have to, like, the way biometrics work is you have the capture, you have the matching, and then you have the storage, right? You have these three things. If I've never seen you before, if the system has never seen you before, the system will not be able to recognize you, will not be able to authenticate you. That's why I think he was asking the question about the data sharing and like consortia type models. And so for today, that is managed within each entity individually. So as you onboard the people, when you do your KYC for your onboarding, you capture the biometrics then and you create a system of record there. And then when you later want to authenticate, the liveness is just saying like, okay, this is a real request. Now tell me if it's a match. It's
Yeah, so I can talk to you after, but liveness is a bit of a misnomer because it's not really saying that you are me as Becky as a live person. It's me as Becky actually just as a live picture. And so, yeah, thank you. And so we're not checking against another image. We're checking if the image came from a real device and a number of different metadata that comes along with that. So and then for instance, we're talking about presentation attacks. So making sure that there isn't, the indication that you're taking a picture of a screen, because that would not be a live image. So it's not really a live person, but it's a live image.
It's two separate things that must be true at the same time, right? The authentication, the biometric match must be true, and the fact that it's like a legitimate presentation of the request of the authentication must be true. Both have to be true in order for it to pass. And there are technologies for what we call liveness, and then there are technologies for the algorithmic performance. They're two separate things. Happy to take more questions, but we're getting kicked out of here.